Hello everyone, Håvard Lunde here, and welcome to a new, already slightly different Moonscape update. This is episode 25. Hope you're all doing well. And as always, thank you so much for watching. I'm sure you already noticed the new intro. I was thinking it might be a good way to start off the new sort of cycle for Moonscape, moving on from the space, time, and sci-fi sort of thematics of the Continuum Synergy back to the somewhat darker realms of the entity concept. For a while, I've been thinking about making a video and talk a little bit more in depth about the story and the concept on those albums, the entity ones. So since the new third and final chapter is here, I figured now might be the right time to do it. I'd like to do a sort of recap of the story, at least the way I'm envisioning it, share some of my own thoughts about it, and let you in on what I've come to realize that this whole concept means to me, myself personally. So that's going to be the basis for today's video. On Entity, the first album, the story begins when the protagonist, or man, which is what I ended up naming him, he's no longer able to face or be part of the world around him or his surroundings. So he locks himself away from the world and escapes into what he believes is a safe place to hide, namely his own mind. He's isolating himself. He's putting up walls to protect himself. And just like for most of us, I guess, the consequence of being isolated and keeping to himself for far too long is that depression starting to get to him during the course of the story. So the sort of sanctuary he thinks he's created for himself is gradually becoming like a prison cell that's becoming more and more difficult to break out of, because there's a demon in there that's holding him back. And that demon, the way I see it, is the voice or the personification of his depression, if that makes sense. At the end of the album, there is a part which is simply called Entity. And the idea behind that is, by then, the protagonist has realized that this is a battle he's never going to win. He's fighting an enemy that's always going to be part of him to some degree. So he might as well just accept it and try to learn to live with it, basically. It took quite some time, maybe a few months after Entity came out, before I realized just how much I was able to personally relate to the premise of the story that I'd written. That was my sort of glimpse of clarity, I guess. It's never entirely autobiographical, but it certainly was a scenario that I found recognizable. And after I'd become aware of the fact that I'd finally managed to metaphorically put into words certain things that up until then I'd never been able to express in any way, it felt like a huge weight coming off my chest. My lyrical approach on Entity was inspired by John Anderson from Yes, who, at least back in the 70s, wrote lyrics that weren't necessarily supposed to mean anything, but he approached them more like a musical instrument and focused on what they could contribute to the musical context. That became my approach as well, and I just wrote down words that sounded right and felt right and didn't really pay too much attention to what they meant. I knew I was writing some sort of story, but I wasn't able to see the full picture at the time. In fact, I'm still processing it, but I eventually realized after the album was out that this whole Moonscape thing lyrically and musically, had the potential of being a great sort of therapeutical vehicle on my part. When I started writing chapter 2, I was more aware that I was writing lyrics from a more personal perspective than I initially thought. To me, that album, at least the first half of it, was my way of dealing with my father's illness and eventually his passing a couple of years later. The opening track is my sort of rendition of that whole process, from myself kind of starting to heal from whatever demon I'd had in my life in parts 1 and 2, and then learning about my father's illness in The Insidious Plague, which is part 3. Part 4 is about myself sitting at his left side at the hospital for many, many days, just trying to be there for him. And part 5, A Warrior's Farewell, is my rendition of the moment when he finally passed. At the very end of that track is a calm sort of instrumental outro called Guardian, the Light Far Yonder, where I try to put into music the kind of peace that I hope my father's at, if that makes sense. When I'm looking out my window here, right behind me here, especially during the winter time, there's a certain star in the sky that I'm looking at, and for some reason it reminds me of him, so that's where that title came from. The angel character in that song is meant to be his mother, my paternal grandmother. She died a couple years before I was born, so by the time my father passed, she had been gone for almost 40 years. The idea is she's there to meet him, to take his hand and guide him over to the other side, basically. That's the kind of image I had in my head when I saw him pass away, that she was there. So it's my way of comforting myself, I guess. But it's also my way of, in my strange way of thinking, reuniting them. Because I can't think of anything that I wish for more than for him being together with his loved ones again on the other side, if there is one. The second half of the album is about trying to resume my own sort of healing process, but also trying to recover from the obvious setback of losing my father. The very last part of the album is called To Live Yet Again, and that's where the protagonist hears the father character's voice in his mind, telling him that life is all within his mind, basically meaning that if he wants to, or if he chooses to be happy, he can. So the idea is that the protagonist makes that choice. He chooses to be happy, and that was supposed to be the end of the story, but I guess I was wrong. I didn't exactly write the man character into the story on that album, but I kind of split him into 3 sort of personalities to try to get a closer look at the different sides of him, in a way. The main mistake I made on that album, and I feel I have to say this, apart from several production-related issues that I feel should have been corrected, was myself doing the vocals for the father character. At the time, I felt like it was the right thing to do, because I wanted to keep that character as close to myself as humanly possible. But in hindsight, it's really not a decision that I'm happy with, and to me, that is the major flaw on that album. Like I said in an interview that I did a while back, I didn't really plan on doing a 3rd chapter of the story, but when I'd finished writing the music for this new album, The first line that immediately came to mind was the very first vocal line. I'm the echo of beginnings that perforates your soul. Whatever that means. That's some twisted stuff. It had the demon written all over it, so it was pretty obvious that he had some unfinished business to take care of. Plus, I wanted a better outcome for the protagonist, so I just went for it. The album title is one that I've had lying around for 11, 12 years, maybe even longer. And it was initially the title of the first sort of epic that I wrote, about 25 minutes long, but it never got past the demo stage. There are some good ideas and riffs on it, but I haven't managed to refine them yet, so we'll see on the next album. This time, I tried to keep the amount of singers and characters to a minimum. So, since the demon and the protagonist are basically one individual, one entity, if you will, I asked Matt Brown if he would do both of them. He said yes, and he did them both magnificently, if you ask me. David Akeson did the voice of Reason, and Nina Pochleven portrayed the female counterpart, which is called Hope. I'm not sure whether or not her name actually is Hope, but at least in the eyes of the protagonist, that's what she symbolizes. So I figured she might be the sort of character that could lead him to a better path in life. I've always had a written prologue on the previous records, but I wanted to try something different this time. Having a spoken word intro gave me an excuse to once again ask Mr. Ken Mills if he'd be willing to lend me his voice again, and thankfully he did. I say thankfully because I love his voice. And because of that, I think the prologue became a really nice, dark, lush, atmospheric sort of intro that I feel perfectly sets the tone of the album. I believe the prologue was done after I'd written the rest of the album, the main album, so it was kind of a last minute sort of thing. And since I'd already written a string arrangement for the opening of part 2, I figured a nice way of building up to it was to keep the main melody and place it into an RP, textured, layered sort of synth context. And I think it made a nice transition from part 1 to part 2. Relapse means that the protagonist has failed his attempt to be happy and to find his way back to life. He's escaped back into that dark, lonely place that he initially thought was some sort of sanctuary. And he's still trying to overcome that inner demon of his. By the third part, the voice of reason is starting to get to him. He's wondering if this is all there is to his life, this sort of prison that he's living in. And he's finally finding the courage to break down those invisible walls that he's been holding up. There's no definite explanation of what's happening in the story, but if you consider he's been isolating himself, it might just mean he just took a walk out the door, basically. This is all my take on it, but the whole story is open for interpretation, so for someone else it might mean something entirely different. Part 4 is a short instrumental interlude called A Guiding Light, which I like to regard as the introduction of the Hope character. I'm playing a sort of melody on my acoustic guitars, which is later repeated in a full symphonic string sort of context during the introduction to A Place to Call Home. The idea is to let you know that Hope is here, she's arrived, and this is the part where we get to learn that her and the protagonist aren't really that different from each other. She's lonely, she's looking for love, and she's burdened by a heavy heart from losing her mother. She's still trying to live like she would want her to. So I would say she's the kind of gentle personality that the protagonist might just need in his life. The title reflects on both of them looking for the same thing, a place to call home or somewhere to belong. On the threshold indicates that the protagonist is actually standing on the doorstep or a threshold to a better life. The voice of reason is telling him not to go back inside because that would be the easy escape, and he might just miss out on something good. So it's gonna be worth it if he just holds on, basically. The demon is trying to hold him back, of course, and trying to lure him back inside. But he's realizing that he's been hiding away from all the good things in life, and it's not going to get any better. So the way I'm thinking, he's getting to that point where he's about to take that first step back outside from isolation. Crossing Over is the instrumental 7th part, which marks the end of the first half of the album. To me, that's the moment when he's leaving his isolation. As I said, he's turning his back on that dark, sad place where it's always raining, metaphorically speaking. He's crossing that threshold, and hope is there as his sort of guiding light, in a way. When I'm hearing that ambient organ part at the end of it, that's when I imagine she's walking towards him. So those light organ notes at the end, to me, they're like her footsteps as she's approaching him. The Light of Day is a moment of reflection for the man character. He's reflecting on the life that he had before he decided to lock himself away. And he never thought he'd be able to get to that point where he is today. He's surrounded by a group of his friends, which I collectively just named the Circle, simply because their support that he never thought he had or deserved to have. And Hope, of course, in all her beautiful persistence, she's swearing to stay by his side until he's daring to be happy again. One Last Temptation is about the protagonist occasionally still feeling the urge to escape back into that false sort of safety that he created for himself. He's on the outside, he's very stressed, uncomfortable, scared. And the way I see it from my own experiences, that's a common and probably natural response to anxiety or panic. So I can't imagine it's easy for him. The voice of reason always knows that he might just be tempted to make that escape because it's a part of him. So in this particular part, it's reminding him that in order for himself to save himself, he's going to have to fight that temptation, and he's going to have to deal with those certain emotions and that certain fear. Revival, part 10, is about the turning point when he's managed to do just that. He's dealt with his fears, his emotions. He's feeling alive again. He's realized the demon is not in control, and although the man character doesn't really appear in this part, it's indicated by Hope that it's an emotional moment for both of them. The diminishing shadows means that the demon is getting weaker, and this is where it spews out its final rant before it finally disappears. And the voice of reason tells the protagonist that he needs to forgive himself in order to be able to move on. The visitation dream, in my view, is where the protagonist is dreaming. And in his dream, he is remembering things that the father once told him when he promised him there's a life waiting for him. When he's waking up, to me, that's the definitive moment when he's realizing he actually made it. Home is an instrumental piece that consists of sort of a piano theme that's being repeated with a few different variations. And the title means that the protagonist is finally at a point in life where he was always supposed to be, I guess. The light of day, the reprise, is where the protagonist is looking back on his journey. He's not alone anymore. He's found his peace and he's reflecting on why and how things happened the way they did. To me, it's a very emotional part, a bit down, maybe even a bit melancholic, but I think it's a nice, positive conclusion to a story about someone who's gone through hell on their own, someone who's tried to find their way back to who they once were, and at the end of that journey, maybe they even find they've become a slightly better version of themselves because of it. So that's all I had for now. I realize this is becoming a rather long video, but I really wanted to tell you my thoughts on the concept, and by now I guess it's obvious that this has become a very personal thing for myself, this story. So I really wanted to share my sort of vision and what it means to myself personally. I really, really hope you enjoy the new album. If you haven't ordered your copy yet, you can do that on Bandcamp. There's a link in the description below that will take you to the album page. And I sincerely hope you all know, every single one of you, just how much I appreciate all your support. It really means a lot to me. So on that note, if you made it this far, thank you so much for watching, and I'll talk to you again very soon. Bye for now.